going to make sure that we get
Zenon Wowczuk. Zenon, the nickname.
That's what I can do.
It's Z. I've heard it all.
Remember.
Yeah. All right. He used to have a podium, but the podium apparently is disappeared because the podium blocks this wing of the thing. So I'm going to have to do it up on the side. All right. What I'm going to do is we're going to start the process, and as people filter in, I think it's important because we have a time frame. We've got at 5. We got a hard stop. So as much as you've seen some of the best for the first 4 panels, I've got a funny feeling that this one is going to really intrigue everyone. And I think this is the one that I want everybody to come back. This is the one about defense technology. And some of that you saw in the segue with AI and with the prosthetics questions, and a lot of it had to deal with the military. But here we're going to be talking about the military industrial complex of Ukraine itself and where it stands now. And I honestly don't think we can get a better set of experts on this issue than the ones that we've assembled for this particular panel. Every panel has been 4 aces and the moderator. I think this one you're going to see the same. So the only substitute we had is Glenn Howard, and Glenn Howard is attending Jan Bugajski's funeral at this very moment. So we have Phil. Have you guys decided? It's Phil is going to be the moderator. Yes. Or no, Greg is going to be the moderator. Okay, Greg, it's all yours.
Okay, go ahead and moderate.
Okay, thanks.
All right, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. I'll be the moderator, Greg Melcher from the Center for the Study of New Generation Warfare. We'll have 3 panelists, Perry Boyle online, Zenon, to my left, and Davis Richardson also online. And then the special discussant will be Phil Peterson, who's from the Center of the New Generation Warfare. And when they get a chance to talk, I'll let them, if they want to, explain more about their backgrounds. What I like to do is offer, since we're on the defense topic, is offer a few words about what type of war this is and things we should be thinking about putting in the right context. And then there's a really nice statement that was written by the Polish head of the National Security Bureau, which I thought was a perfect lead into the 3 discussants that we're going to have here today. So let me just jump right into that, and I'll watch the time, and you want to be done by 5. Okay, so I have an overall assessment of the war I want to offer as we turn to this topic. A fair assessment of this war versus one that might be fought with NATO countries must take into account, first, the substantial military capability that NATO possesses that we did not give to Ukraine. 2, we significantly restricted the use of the capabilities that we did give them in fear of escalation or by being deterred by Russian threats of nuclear use. The war will look much different given the range and depth of deep strike capability the West possesses, whether it's various tactical aircraft, including ones off aircraft carriers, things like HIMARS, long-range artillery, Apache attack helicopters, other long-range systems such as Tomahawk, which is being debated these days. So we hear that, the Russians talking about forming up to 100 drone battalions. They plan to field soon, but these aren't going to get very close to the kind of damage they're doing today in Ukraine, given the standoff capability that we have. Those standoff bombers that are lobbing big bombs into Ukraine today, they won't get close. They're going to get shot down. Further, many counter-drone systems are in development, such as AI-enabled defensive drone swarms that can loiter, providing troop overwatch, as well as an already tested microwave weapons, which are highly effective even against the fiber optic guided drones. No doubt Ukraine is quite proud of their achievements, and they should be, in drone warfare, as they have established a kill or gray zone that has grown from a few kilometers to 10 to probably 25 kilometers today, and perhaps even 50 kilometers or more in the future. By the way, when you cross that 50-kilometer barrier, you take unguided artillery off the table, a 155 shell, that's outside its range. They've done the best they can given the limitations of the capabilities provided by the West, and there's more coming. But by the way, I wanted to invite you to read a recent RUSI article by Justin Bronk. He put it out in August. It says, NATO should not replace traditional firepower with drones. It makes my point above that many know far more elegant in a detailed manner. Lessons learned in the last war should always be studied carefully, as they rarely directly apply in the next war for a wide variety of reasons. Okay, I do want to make a comment on Tomahawk as well. Tomahawk is a drone. It was originally created to carry a nuclear weapon, and now the more modern non-nuclear version has a loitering and attack mode, and this has been in the field for 25 years. It's a drone. It's just a really expensive one. You know, it was said earlier that Ukraine invented drones. I think they've invented a way of innovating with drones. It's remarkable. But let's be clear what it is and isn't. They've certainly brought this drone warfare to level together with Russia, given the limitations we've placed on them in the war. That said, even without Tomahawk, Ukraine himself will have their own version of this type of long-range capability. As you know, the Flamingo is in the early stages of fielding, and it not only has a longer range and a bigger warhead than a Tomahawk, although it may be less accurate and more vulnerable, but it's a lot cheaper as well, and they can build it at home. And I understand there's possibly a ballistic missile following that. So just some general comments on war. Now I want to talk to the National Security Bureau, Jacek Suera, just went to Kyiv, and he wrote this the other day, and I thought it was a perfect lead-in. I was in Kyiv, a city that, despite sirens and night raids, is teeming with life and the will to fight. What strikes me the most is the combination of courage and engineering ferocity. A soldier must understand the construction of the machine, assemble it, report the necessary changes, because one lighter battery, different rotor blades, or more resistant sensor can move the front by another kilometer. These kilometers are human life. In Kyiv, technology is born not from abstract plans, but from the direct need to save lives and defend values. This is where the division collapses. The military learns from civilians, and the industry learns from the front. This symbiosis, hands-on test and real-world conflict, and quick feedback from users creates a pace of innovation that is hard to imagine in peaceful peacetime. I came with a conviction we need to learn from Ukraine not only technical solutions, but also the approach to the production and training, engaging subject matter experts because they do the most work here, and systematic training where operator understands the tool is an investment in efficiency. This is not a militaristic desire to escalate, it is pragmatism. The better the equipment, the better the training, the fewer the casualties. You know, kind of the definition of deterrence. And this is where the key theme for me comes in. The development of defense technology should be carried out of respect for life and Latin culture. That is to say, the priority is not the ability to cause destruction itself, but the protection of innocent, the minimization of damage, the preservation of dignity and values of the European civilization that we defend. Technologies are supposed to serve a civilization based on respect for freedom and life. What I've seen is not just unarmed conflict. It is a lesson for Europe about the value of industry, about technical education, about the fact that security starts with the ability to adapt quickly. I call for investment in defense technologies, for support for companies that produce a real defense tools today, and for the building of a culture in which technology always goes hand in hand with respect for life and human rights. Kyiv is giving a clear testimony: innovation can save. We, out of respect for life and Latin culture, have a duty to accept this lesson. So with that, let me turn to the panelists, and I think we'll just go in order in the program. And we'll start with Perry Boyle, from Chief Executive Officer for MITS Capital, who is online and hopefully is on the screen.
I think I am. Great. Thank you. Perry Boyle, MITS Capital, based in Kyiv. We are right now, I believe, the largest group doing defense technology investing in Ukraine. How did I get to this? I'm an American. I live in Ketchum, Idaho. I knew nothing about Ukraine before the full-scale invasion. I volunteered to fight with the International Legion, was rejected, but somebody in the Ukrainian embassy in DC was smart enough to look me up on LinkedIn, saw my background, and realized that I could be useful to Ukraine in bringing investment capital into Ukraine. And so my approach has been, what are the impediments to bringing capital into Ukraine, into Ukraine's domestic defense industry? How do we minimize those and get more money into Ukraine's domestic defense industry? Our general thesis is that World War III is game on. Ukraine is just one of the theaters of war. that this is going to last substantially longer than most people anticipate. If they read Russian textbooks, if they read Russian political philosophy, they would understand a bit more about the imminent danger, not just to Ukraine, but to Europe in particular. So our goal is to build up Ukraine's domestic defense industry to get the Russians out now, but to integrate Ukraine into Europe's defense architecture to deter and defend against autocratic invasions of the future, of which we don't think that they will end for quite some time. So we started with a defense technology accelerator where we brought kind of American techniques to developing startups in Ukraine. We run it in partnership with American University Kyiv. It was great to see one of the professors earlier on a panel. And we started that in May of 2024. We have run 2 cohorts of companies through that. We're about to launch the 3rd cohort next month. And from that, we have developed a portfolio of venture capital companies. We have 11 companies in the portfolio. We're about to add another 8 or 9 to get to about 20. But when you look at what's going on in the startup community in Ukraine, this isn't really what's needed now. What's really needed is scaling. What Russia has figured out is how to scale the production of drones. And they have factories that are largely manned by women from North Korea, women from Africa, that are creating the capacity to launch thousands of drones a night in an attack on a Ukrainian city. Ukraine needs to scale up its drone and counter drone production accordingly. Venture capital in Ukraine is tough. There are no exits. Okay, there's no IPO market. There's no natural buyer. There's only one defense prime in Ukraine. It's Ukrbоронпром, state-owned. It's more a collection of companies than a strategic growth platform. So in September 17th at Defense Tech Valley in Lviv, I announced a new company that we've just created called MITS Industries. It's a consolidation of several established Ukrainian companies, 200 million in revenues, 1,000 people, and registered in Denmark. MITS Industries is intended to be a consolidation platform for the myriads of subscale Ukrainian companies, help them scale, help them export. We hired several people from Ukrbоронпром to lead exports. We're already working on that. And in MITS Industries right now, we have the world's largest producer of ground drones, 10-core. We have InfoZakis, which makes signal intelligence stuff, and then Unwave, which makes electronic warfare things. We have a whole org chart of capabilities we're working on. We have a team to do what we in America call business development, otherwise known as mergers and acquisitions. We incorporated this in Denmark because one of the impediments to capital coming to Ukraine is the perception that governance in Ukraine does not meet US and European standards. I have not found that personally in the companies in which I've been working, but that's a perception that impedes capital. So we incorporated in Denmark. We're going to have an office in Copenhagen with a Scandinavian CEO and CFO, and that's where the governance and financial backbone of the company will be. Denmark is not going to have a defense industrial base that is competitive with Ukraine's, and I think many in Europe are coming to the conclusion that maybe the US will come to their aid, but maybe it won't. And if it doesn't, they need to have their own capabilities. And Ukraine is the country that has proven that it is making what can hold Russia back. We're currently raising money for MITS Industries, and we have a very accelerated timeline for building this into a multi-billion-dollar company. It will be, as I said, a defense prime for Ukraine. if we don't do this, if people in Ukraine don't do this, what's going to happen to Ukraine's defense industry is it's going to get picked off. These companies will get bought by European and US defense contractors, and it will leave Ukraine vulnerable to the attack that will come in 20, 30, 40 years from the east. So that's what we're focused on. I can't wait for the Q&A on this, and we can get into specific capabilities of things that Ukraine is doing, but it's very important, I think, that people understand that somebody said on an earlier panel that Ukraine is not we've got to stop thinking about Ukraine as being incapable. Like Ukraine has massive capabilities, and it is not just a potential partner for Europe. It's required. Ukraine cannot. I mean, Europe cannot hold back Russia without Ukraine. And the sooner they realize that, the safer everyone will be. Ukraine is the only low-cost defense industrial base in the free world, the only one that can even hope to compete with China. It's by far the most innovative. The Ukrainian military leads to a structure that drives that integration that a NATO country cannot match. And it's been scaling production quite rapidly, so exports are coming. Thank you very much, and I think the next panelist should take a turn. Thanks.
Is that me?
Okay, thank you very much. Do we want to take any questions, or do you want to wait to the end? Okay, okay. The next we'll hear from Zenon here on my left. If you go ahead and introduce yourself and go from there.
Yep. Hello, everybody. My name is Zenon Wowczuk, and with my brothers, Buddhis and Yuri, we run the Civil Military Innovation Institute, and also started up the Volk Foundation, one of the sponsors of this event. What I'm going to talk briefly about is Ukrainian defense innovation as an asset. Now and then moving forward. Ukraine has set the precedent on the speed of innovation in the defense industry. Everybody realizes that. We realize that here in the US. Question, what are some of the elements of this innovation model Ukraine has created that Ukraine defense industry can capture and indoctrinate for years to come? So making sure that, post, let's just say this part of the war during some peacetime, that this continues on. How do we indoctrinate that into the defense industry moving forward in Ukraine? We have to assume and know that the speed of innovation in Ukraine that they've demonstrated, it can't be sustained forever, even during peacetime. And it's just the way it is now, is because of the fact that we're defending our country. Having said that, again, back to what elements can be maintained as the basis for the future defense, I would call defense innovation apparatus as part of the state defense industry. I believe now outlining the structure of this defense innovation, I'll call it the Defense Innovation Laboratory in Ukraine, now is needed to maintain this momentum and to ensure Ukraine as a country can benefit long-term economically from this incredible asset. Ukraine defense innovation. Again, thinking of it as an asset, similar to as when people talk about Ukraine, they talk about rare earths and every other asset there. But this asset, I believe, in the future economically is more valuable than any rare earth that could come out of the ground. Part two of this, the key pillar of the Ukraine defense innovation model. The one thing that we've seen and observed is the soldier-inspired innovation element needs to become the pillar moving forward of the Ukraine Defense Innovation Laboratory. And many people here, or people that are not familiar with the defense industry, would think that this is just basic. You listen to your end user, your customer. Well, having been in business here in the US, that is typically not the way that we go about doing our acquisition process. So that is why, as this reset, let's just say, happens during some peacetime, getting this indoctrinated at the beginning in the Ukrainian defense industry is critical and will lead to such success down the line, ensuring that the soldier is involved in any innovation or R&D asset from the beginning and not handing them equipment at the end as we've seen during SAG-U and everybody else when they sent over all the equipment, and a lot of it was not used and put on the side. We've got to have the soldier involved at the beginning. Why did I pick this one element? We saw it firsthand, and I'll just give a brief example. We were working with a U.S. military innovation group here on an electronic warfare UAS detection capability that was developed here in the U.S. and investments, significant investment by the U.S. government and private industry to get to a final system. So during this development, at the tail end of the development process, they did not, or I'm sorry, during the beginning of this R&D process, they did not focus significant on engagement and co-design with soldiers. That was, again, you had a bunch of smart people that thought they knew best sitting in a lab. I mean, we've all heard this story, developing this really beautiful scientific piece of kit that they felt was going to be able to go to the field and actually provide value. What we did then, as we saw this as part of one of our contracts, we connected them because of our relationships in Ukraine with a group out of the Ukrainian EW cell in Ukraine, and took the asset over, met with the soldiers of the EW cell. After engagement, included a face-to-face demonstrations and trial at their EW testing grounds. We discovered the system would not have been a value add at all to the Ukrainian force in combat. So think about that. For years and years and years, this system was invested upon in defense. And again, I'm bringing this one in specific incident up, but this is a countless of these examples throughout the U.S. defense industry. So met with them, did the testing. And one thing I think to bring up here, because we always talk about, well, this war is different than a future adversary. Well, this system was developed as quote unquote universal to our adversary. So that was kind of, it wasn't meant for a Chinese conflict. It wasn't meant for special forces going to certain areas. It was an EW system that was billed as being able to, do what it needed to do to detect certain UAS systems. The punchline here is, and so again, the soldiers came back and they provided us a list of everything that was wrong with the system, how it could be employed not only here, but the threats that they were seeing coming in the future from not only Russia, but again, China, North Korea, that are all involved in this in this war as well. It by far was the most meaningful engagement that this technology had to transition to now pivot to become something that could actually be used by the U.S. And again, it was something that we forced upon this R&D asset and R&D program, and they learned more during that than going out to NTC or any other proving grounds here in the U.S. because everything's in a perfect stage for them to test this asset against. So again, if this could have been done from the beginning with soldiers involved, that soldier-inspired innovation, ones that are have seen conflict, understand the threat itself, and again, I'm a PhD and not just geeks in the laboratory developing something that they think they can field. So I'm allowed to say that, but so that's an example of, I think, going back to, we've got a really great opportunity here as this, I'll say this next phase happens, to ensure that we harness this asset. This asset is marketable, but more importantly, that we indoctrinate this asset into the Ukrainian defense industrial base moving forward. Just a couple other points I want to bring up on that. Laying the groundwork of that now. So assembling this structure so it could be implemented post-war into the new defense industry. A huge benefit and key reason this has flourished in Ukraine is because Ukraine mobilized, again, citizens, right, from that had backgrounds in telecommunications or other industries like that, and they were mobilized and they had this great knowledge in the private sector, and then they were taught to go or forced or wanted to go fight for their country. In the U.S., again, that's typically not the way it's set up. A soldier is a soldier typically when he's 70, 18 years old and wants to go to war. The National Guard, I think, is an asset here in the U.S. and a model that needs to become more like the what the Ukrainians did, because these are folks that do have other jobs, and combining that capability that soldier then can use during the innovation process or the R&D process, working with the researchers, I think is a valuable concept. I'll just also bargaining chip with EU and US. One specific item, I think, that again, we talk about mineral assets. I'll say that the defense innovation or the innovation mentality is an asset that Ukraine needs to focus on for sure. How to market that, how to use that as a capability, because it is different. It is something that we've seen that just the speed of it is light years ahead. And I'll repeat that again, from the way, the US and again in Europe, the way they go about their defense industry as well and their innovation push. One thing I would love to see then is that, they cut deals then and have satellite setups inside of the EU, the US, of the innovation laboratory of Ukraine, to work with some of the other labs. Again, I think there should be some return on that of the asset that we're providing then to these other groups, to teach them, I think, and I'll say it like that, to teach them how to innovate better and how to really innovate. And again, I'll use the soldier-inspired basis of that as the main part of it. I'll say, if I could wave a magic wand and do a complete restart of the U.S. military laboratories, the soldier-inspired or soldier-integrated element would be a key foundation of all R&D execution. Full stop, all of it. Again, it seems like a very basic concept, but it is not, and that's something that, again, if we could restart, that's what we would need to do. So again, we have a great opportunity moving forward here, I think, to use this innovation asset to prosper, to continue to innovate and develop technologies, but also to use it as a monetary asset that we can market moving forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we'll turn to David Richardson, the founder director of the American Ukraine Strategic Partners, and I hope he's on the screen. Yes, he is.
Great. Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Davis Richardson. I oversee America Ukraine Strategic Partners, OSP. I also oversee the U.S. Communications and Public Relations Agency, Paradox Public Relations. I typically don't mention the latter part, but because this is a conversation on defense, we are registered with the U.S. Justice Department under FARA, and we've been working with Brave One for coming up on a year now, specifically about taking a lot of Ukrainian companies that are part of the Brave One tech cluster and promoting those stories to US and European audiences. I am also an LP in Green Flag Ventures, which is a VC fund that invests in dual-use Ukrainian defense technology. America Ukraine Strategic Partners, we founded this last year. It was our fourth visit to the country since 2022, although one of our other co-founders has been involved with Ukraine since Maidan. Essentially, we noticed a gap between how the U.S. administration under Biden, but continuing a little bit today, and the Ukrainian administration. There's definitely alignment, and there's larger historical forces than the leaders of either of these countries, which is structurally it's incompatible for the United States to have any kind of trade agreements or economic ties with Russia that supersedes any U.S. president, doesn't matter if it's Republican or Democrat. And where the private sector and the defense industries largely moving, our thesis has always been this is going to be a marriage between the United States and Ukraine and these two defense industries. There's a lot of noise that comes out of the news cycle and politics, but largely speaking, the forces that we're seeing on the private sector side is very encouraging. We had a meeting with the White House last week to discuss, a technology bridge between the United States and Ukraine. And although in, certain, circles, there's conversations around a bridge like this, why doesn't a bridge like this happen? It's largely something that has to be constructed through the pre-existing, mechanisms within the U.S. federal government. One of the interesting things is when we're talking about, lessons learned from the battlefield, when we're talking about, some kind of, whether it's data transfer, whether it's just making sure that there's proper sharing between both parties. The United States government is a large apparatus, and the mechanisms need to be in place so that it's able to absorb this. So what do I mean by that? Ukraine is, fighting every day on the battlefield, and there are pressing needs that take obviously more urgency and which are more important than bureaucracy. But there is something that needs to happen where it's like if you're sending secret files, or if you're sending sensitive information that these companies are sitting on, maybe Google Drive isn't the most effective way of doing it. Maybe there's, security compromises with using Telegram or some of these other apps for every, interface. And that's kind of been the elephant in the room that we've noticed, where everybody's talking about this. And again, there's more pressing needs on the front line, and that's always going to take priority. But in the long term, there needs to be the infrastructure supported, not just so that there can be open channels between the United States, but also it is a security risk. So we're looking to bridge that gap. We've had very, very positive conversations with both the White House and also different members of U.S. military about what this bridge looks like. I think, with AUSA, one of the main recurring themes of the military conference last week was how do we integrate this technology? And, I will agree with something that Perry, pointed out. Our main priority is we want this bridge to be directly between the United States government and the Ukrainian government. I think even though we do a lot of work with the primes, our thesis more or less echoes with what Perry said, where there will be some consolidation in the future with a lot of these companies. And to echo the language that President Trump used when he's talking about, cards and chips and all of that, the defense-based industry that has really emerged since 2022 is a very, very significant card that Ukraine has right now. And it has to be very careful in terms of if there is a technology bridge, United States isn't just using that for its own benefit. It really has to be both ways, with proper security guarantees that are also put in place for Ukraine, so we don't just see another repeat of this happening in a few years. To touch on some of our activities in Ukraine, we have partnerships and agreements in place with Kyiv School of Economics, Taras Shevchenko University on a U.S. Ukrainian educational exchange program where we're connecting Ukrainian students to remote internship opportunities in the United States. We're heavy investors in Ukrainian culture. As one of my favorite Ukrainian entrepreneurs, Evgeny Utkin, who oversees UARPA, told me, 6 months ago, what's the point of defense if there's no culture that you're defending? So for us, when we entered the Ukrainian market officially, to us, it was very important to invest in education programs, arts and culture initiatives. During August, we sponsored a week-long festival at St. Sophia Cathedral, which made 40 events open and free to the public. So I think Americans are very used to operating in vertical silos, and that's why Americans have struggled with Ukraine specifically, where if you want to work with defense, you have to work with civilian and civic societies. If you want to work with reconstruction or anything in global development, you need to be working with the military. all of this overlays and fits on top of itself, and to us is really part of a larger historical process of the creation of Ukraine going forward. So very happy to be speaking today. I love everyone on this panel, and very happy this is taking place.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'll turn to Phil Peterson from New Generation Warfare Center as the special discussant.
Thank you. I prepared some remarks, as I prefer to do, to make sure that I have actually something to contribute, but I did take 4 additional notes that I'll offer comments on. So if I got slides up. First slide. Okay, the 9 elements of Russia's new generation warfare represent a theoretical framework for the struggle between the American-initiated experiment with secular self-rule and the most primitive instincts of humanity. Psychologists say that approximately 1/3 of all humans are simply psychologically predisposed to slavery or serfdom. And the axis of evil in Eurasia is determined to exploit this reality. The Russian Federation, no genuine federation, and the People's Republic of China, the only people it represents are the criminal conspiracy organized as the Communist Party of China, as well as the primitive, feudal, fundamentalist, religious extremist government of Iran and the personal family dictatorship in North Korea, make up the unsavory group of mass murderers determined to prevent the evolution toward a more just world. The struggle must be waged continuously against enemies, both foreign and domestic. It is a struggle not against ethnicities or religions, but a civic religion founded on the belief that all humans are or ought to be equal before the law. Slide 2, please. It is incumbent upon NATO member states and NATO officials to understand that this war is not just about the existence of Ukraine. These guys are part of an axis of upheaval intending to end illiberal democracy and restore the past, which is feudalism. While they'd prefer to be invited in, they're prepared to break in and tear down the common European home constructed over the past 80 years. Slide 3, please. While Ukraine started its independence in 1991 with a substantial defense industry, the corrupt government inherited from the Soviet Union had little incentive during the apparent period of eternal peace to meet its responsibilities to protect its sovereignty and its peoples. Even as the tensions between Moscow and Kiev mounted, the most primitive, self-serving greed overruled rational decision-making on behalf of the country and its peoples. Slide 3, please. Desperation, however, has unchained the creativity of Ukrainians. The Muscovites have provided the necessary incentive for the development of a sound investment strategy that can move beyond the rational self-interest of Ukraine and the rest of Europe. Offshoring production capacity should be one of the means by which to harness together Ukrainian and European Union defense industry to the goal of decolonizing the Russian Empire. That is the only path to ending war in Europe. Now, to some of the comments from an earlier panel, drones are not going to replace classical weapons platforms like tanks, planes, or helicopters. So any of this nonsense that they're going to make them obsolete is just foolishness. This current drone circumstance is no revolution in military affairs, and I'll be happy to go into that in detail if somebody wants to pursue it. Now, with regard to the speakers, Perry Boyle gets it. Ukraine is but one battle of World War III, which we are already in. He is pursuing the question of how to integrate Ukraine into European defense. This is the question. As Greg always likes to say, we are not in the business of giving you answers. We are in the business of trying to help you identify the questions. Russia cannot be an empire without Ukraine. Turning to Zenon, he pointed out one of the key points of failure in the US is an example I can take from my own grandson, who's a member of a Patriot launch crew. He told me that every time his equipment was returned from factory maintenance, his crew needed to reset the equipment to function in the field. The soldier needs to be the center of innovation. And the third and last comment relates to what Davis Richardson said, what he worries about the future threat from the Muscovites. And this again is the question. Only decolonization, the freeing of the prison of nations called Russia today, Soviet Union before that, Imperial Russia before that, Muscovy before that, only freeing those prisons of nations will end the wars in Europe and guarantee peace. And I'll be happy to argue about that as well. Thank you.
So first, I'd like to give the panelists a chance either to ask Phil a question about what he said or comment on it or anything else they said. Would anybody like to take that opportunity? Well, not seeing that, then we'll go to questions. Yep.
Mr. Peterson, nonetheless, your remark presupposes that there's a plan for the breakup of the Russian Federation, which we all have to keep in mind there isn't. There isn't the basis for breaking up yet. All of the regional heads report to Moscow. They don't have local legitimacy. They don't really have local agency that's separate from the center. And fully understand and in a way agree with decolonializing, I should say, the Russian Federation. It's a extremely complex and extremely dangerous proposition. If you'd like to comment, please do, but that's definitely my opinion.
I fundamentally disagree. I think that it's an artificial construct, and it is being maintained by essentially the man most qualified to maintain it, because his only qualification was that he ran terrorist operations out of Dresden. So he's a terrorist, and he's terrifying his people, and he's buying people off. It's nothing but a criminal organization. There is actually a lot of planning going into the decolonization of Russia, just not officially, okay? But there's a lot of unofficial groups, and I would recommend that you turn to the work by Paul Goebel, my view, the greatest CIA analyst ever produced in the United States, who is very actively working with those people, and they meet on a regular basis. And there are preparations that are ongoing even in Russia itself. There are regions who are already preparing for the collapse. I just think that we made the mistake in 1991 when we decided to first try to preserve the Soviet Union, and then we managed to help preserve Russia. That was a mistake. There's no danger in the collapse of that state. Nobody wants to run around with nuclear warheads. That's just a myth that's being generated by the Muscovites to terrify us. But that isn't, listen, at the time the Soviet Union collapsed, we had the wives of officers pulling duty in the launch facilities. So don't tell me about how somehow the center guarantees stability. That's nonsense. Russia is an inherently fragile structure. And I don't object to the existence of Russia. If the peoples of the Russian Federation want to relaunch a genuine federation from below, that's fine. But it can't be Moscow driven, because Moscow will always be an imperial paradigm. And empire has no natural borders. And therefore, they will always be at war with their neighbors.
Question here.
Yeah, thank you so much for a very insightful discussions. So my first question will be for Perry. And thank you for wearing, I don't know if Perry is still online, but thank you for wearing that Vyshyvanka, the defense like Vyshyvanka with the missiles. It looks great. That's perfect. And thank you for the partnership between MITS and American University Kyiv. So it's a real honor to be partnering with you. So my question is, you mentioned that Ukraine is the only country that can compete with China in defense tech. So this is a really powerful message in my opinion. So how do we put this message on the tables of all politicians and other stakeholders to recognize? And I also have the second question to all the panelists. So one of the basically defense techs that was not mentioned is war games. So simulation modeling of battlefield operations of drones, swarms of drones. So it's known from the open publications at the beginning of the war, pretty much US military was doing this type of modeling for Ukraine, putting it on the tables of Ukrainian military in the Wiesbaden base in Germany. And after that, Ukrainian military decided to use this modeling or not. And according to the publications, it was used in the liberation of Kharkiv and the liberation of Kherson. So now probably Ukraine has advanced in this type of modeling as well. So how do we build collaborations in war games, in simulation modeling of operations of especially robotic systems to our common advantage? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question, Alexander. It's very difficult. The challenge is that most defense industries are national or nationalistic. So I'll give you a concrete example. The European Commission has allocated capital to be invested in Ukrainian defense companies, but they have implementing partners that you have to go through. So I had a meeting with a Polish bank, which is the implementing partner. And the first question out of their mouth is, what's in this for Poland? Like, what the heck? So it's going to be a challenge. And I think, and this is one of the reasons why many of us have been just so aggressive with the Ukrainian ministries about the need for exports. Okay, we can say all we want until we're blue in the face that Ukrainian equipment is better and cheaper. But until we can put it in the hands of an ally, how can they know that, right? So I know that all production has to go to the front. The number one priority, get Russia out of Ukraine. I get that. But to bring capital into Ukraine to be able to scale up production so more can go into the front, some proportion of that is going to have to be exportable. And we already have industries in Ukraine or sub-industries in Ukraine that do have excess capacity and are ripe for export, and it's starting. So once we can put this stuff in their hands and they can see, oh, there is a reason why Ukraine makes more howitzers than the entirety of NATO combined at a price point no manufacturer in NATO can come close to. Is it as good as the Caesar? I don't know. But it's not that far off. And the price point is compelling. In terms of China, I would not say that Ukraine is can compete with China on technology, because in some areas it can and some it can't, but where it can is on cost structure. The United States is the high cost producer of almost everything that's manufactured. And it's electricity is expensive, labor is expensive, land's expensive, regulatory burden's expensive, right? In China, you don't have any of that stuff. The cost of electricity in China is half that of the United States. War is horrible in that it's such a waste of material, but you have to produce the material. The guy who can put the most ordnance on target tends to win, and that is a combat against economies and cost per effect. And where Ukraine has a competitive advantage against every NATO nation is in cost per effect. We are trying to take China out of our supply chains. So we have a drone motor for quadcopters that we charge $25 for. You can buy it from China for $20. Ours has an Indian magnet, not a Chinese magnet. The US equivalent with the Chinese magnet is $50. Without the Chinese magnet, it's $80. I mean, I just can go time and time and time again on this, give you example after example. So, you know, Ukraine is greatly advantaged. Oh, I think Philip or someone made the point about, or maybe Mr. Wowczuk made the one of the things that differentiates Ukraine's military and drives its innovation is that it has 1,500 combat commands that can buy whatever they can pay for without going through a Pentagon. Right now, they acquire about 20% of what is used on the battlefield in Ukraine. That's why it's innovative. It's the closest thing to a marketplace for weaponry that exists in the free world. And that's a great point worth exploring if people want to go into that in more depth, and I've talked too much. Thanks.
Richard, and good to see you, Richard. I'll jump in there a little bit on, the question on, swarm technology and as it relates to partnerships with the US. There's a company which I think everybody in this room is very familiar with, but Swarmer. Green Flag Ventures has invested in Swarmer. Perry's VC fund has invested in. Oh, sorry, my bad.
No, we're not. We're not.
Well, we love Swarmer, but very successful swarm drone company. But they incorporated in Delaware, and they've always had their eye to the U.S. market, and it's a very unique example in that they've pioneered swarm drone technology on the battlefield with military operations, but they've also had their eye towards, what does an exit look like? What does expansion look like? What does it mean to compete in different markets like the US? So incorporated in Delaware, and they're making a number of initiatives with registering on sam.gov and actually engaging with the US military for the procurement process. And I think something like that is ultimately, it strengthens relationships between these two bases. And I think you're going to see more Ukrainian companies start to access the system. One maritime company that we have a very good relationship with in Ukraine recently got approved for a DIU initiative. And in terms of a strengthening of those bases, I think the partnership there's a lot of complaints I have towards the procurement process. I think you have to move around it, but as you move around it, actually engaging it is also how you tie these two countries' industries together. And I think you're going to see a number of JVs start over the next 6 months to a year between American companies, Ukrainian companies, and Ukrainian defense companies in Ukraine start to access the US market. And I think if it's any indicator that shows where this is going, Swarmer just recently closed I think it was a Series A round, but it was they raised 15 million, which evaluates the company, I think at roughly $100 million. Broadband led that. So this is a huge success story that's coming out of Ukraine. And, Swarmer's not an outlier. There's a lot of companies like that which are innovating and which are going to be very attractive to both US investors. And, I think there's been a bit of a I think it needs to be recalibrated, because when people talk about, the Trump administration is, too transactional and it's not operating on a values-based system like the Biden administration or democracy and shared values. I think that misses the point that Ukraine has a lot to offer here. So it's like, okay, if it's transactional, let it be transactional, because Ukraine has a ton of cards to its chest. Despite that meeting earlier this year, where President Trump said that they didn't. There's a lot of tremendous innovation that's happening there, and there's a lot of great companies that are coming out of there.
Hi, I'm Veronica, and I represent Ukrainian American Civics Club. And my question is, what inspired you to start MITS Capital?
Hello, and I'm Victoria Didich, and I'm also representing Ukrainian American Civics Club. And my question is to Mr. Greg Melcher of how you guys have improved the drones.
Okay, Perry, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple, just moral outrage. I had a 35-year career on Wall Street, and I retired in 2019, and this is now my life's work. I've converted to Ukrainianism. I'm going to need a tutor. I need to learn Ukrainian. Hey, but Davis, just one point. So I don't know if you're aware, but this is one of my concerns about what America's doing to Ukraine. Okay, so Swarmer's a great company. Two Sigma has now cloned Swarmer, a company called Swarmero, not Swarmer, but Swarmero, and is raising $30 million at a $200 million valuation for exactly what Swarmer does, with no field operational capability that Swarmer has. And this is not unique to the United States. So Ukraine has to get money into itself as quickly as possible. And this is why we created MITS Industries, is we need to bring money in at scale so that we can defend Ukraine's domestic defense industry against assault from its allies. I mean, it's really quite distressing. Thank you for the question, though, Victoria.
No, and I hear what you're saying, Perry. And again, this is our approach has always been, there are certain instances where there's no way around it. You're gonna have to operate with some kind of prime, but you also need to make sure that the intellectual property is protected and that this does not become some kind of blood for data transaction. That's the absolute worst case scenario that I don't think anyone wants to see happen, which is why we've always advocated for carving out the necessary bureaucratic elements that allow a partnership like that to take place. And we've always advocated that if you're able to move forward without a prime, it's best to sell into US government directly. And a lot of the Ukrainian entrepreneurs are very, very smart. They understand how business operates. And I think that there's an unavoidability of what you're describing that also isn't unique to the American marketplace. But if it's a group of entrepreneurs which are capable of navigating, both the procurement process and the business process of so making sure that you don't get knocked off by a competitor like that. I have tremendous faith in Ukrainian entrepreneurs, and we advocate for the needs of our Ukrainian partners to ensure that something like that doesn't happen. But I think it's a very valid concern, and I do share the belief with you that a lot of the primes should be approached very cautiously. We've had the opportunity to facilitate, some partnerships with some of the larger companies, And we have gone, through the nightmare process instead of saying, no, these companies are capable of standing up on their own 2 feet and selling to USG directly without an intermediary who, by the way, is going to be ripping off the American taxpayer. So, the entire procurement process is in a massive transition right now. And I think this is something that's ultimately going to benefit Ukrainian companies seeking exposure to the US market.
I can jump in while you're on the topic. Is there any organized method that you're going after the safe money? I mean, it's 150 billion. It's been allocated. I guess they're going to get it by next summer. And obviously EU companies will have to be the lead, but I would think there would be some way that could be linked in with Ukraine, some of the Ukrainian companies. Is there anything from the investor side that you see trying to do that in any organized way, or does that make sense, either one of you?
Well, the European Flagship Fund, we have a very great group of Ukrainian partners who recently submitted an application to that. It's going to be a slow-moving beast. And, as an American looking at it, I think, US is really largely going to have the domain of defense, and anything that's reconstruction related, it's going to be European parties that are, going to access those pools of capital. But I think, there was a great initiative that JP Morgan just announced this week where they're committing billions of dollars into national security priorities. I think over, the next few years, there's kind of like, dual use, which I know Evelyn at D3 hates that term. I personally don't see any problem with the term dual use, but I think over the next few years, you'll move into an environment where, investors and financial institutions are much more comfortable saying, these funds are being allocated for defense.
Yeah, one of the challenges is anything associated with a government takes forever. And the fastest that we see government money being deployed from the application point to the funding point is 6 months. Okay. There's a war on. And this is why we focus on private capital that can commit and move more quickly. But the challenge is we could use some government money as like a seal of approval, right? And that's what we really need. We just need to show that there is institutional at the government level support behind Ukrainian defense. And the Ukrainian Defense Fund, which is a phenomenal organization, 2 years. It takes 2 years to get the money between when you put the paperwork in and when you get the money. So we need to speed up this cycle time if we're going to get, I love going to Ukrainian recovery conferences. Okay. There is no recovery until Russia's defeated. Okay. We have to keep this in mind. And, everyone seems more hell-bent on putting billions of dollars into rebuilding Ukraine than putting in hundreds of millions of dollars to get the Russians out.
I think then that there's one gentleman.
A question to everybody. Ukrainian Board-Prom, Ukraine Board-Prom, hindrance or just as good as the war production board we had here during the Second World War? Thank you.
That may have worked out, but not. So then I'll follow up on that as the last, I guess, as the last question. Oh, can I ask? Oh, no, I was about to, I gave it to him. Do you want to do, because I do have a question. And that is on the agility question. On to the agility question. You've all mentioned it. All of you have mentioned it. I agree, maybe the drones aren't the way out, but I saw it in Irpin and Bucha in May of 22 when I got there, and it was the territorial defense folks, Ben, that had defended Irpin and Bucha. And I now understand what you're saying. There was a kind of partisan, almost partisan spirit to the Army. Our National Guard has that same, the roots. In fact, you got to remember that our Army, until 19-something or other, 1915 or 14, we basically were a National Guard-based Army. We were not this sort of, our regular army was very small. We had the Marines, but the National Guard was the basis. It was then that we actually knew what the soldiers needed until that point. After that, we created a very bureaucratic thing. And by now, in almost 100 years, and this is the way I'm addressing it to all of you, are we at this point, man, looking back at the US, not at Ukraine, but looking at the US, have we become so over-bureaucratized and so much that we lack the agility to fight the wars that are happening? And are the Russians learning from the Ukrainians and the partisan warfare the Ukrainians have been playing? Are they learning agility in a way we're not learning agility? And that's my question to all of you folks.
You want to take a shot at it?
I'll answer really. Yeah, we have. I mean, we've lost that agility, and again, I think we've layered there's so many layers that have been put on, so many, and again, we got away from the basic concept of listening and working with the end user. I mean, that's really where when you're having acquisition decisions being made outside of that simple premise, which we are, you've strayed, I think, pretty far away from that to be able to be agile and be able to do things in a manner to change with the speed of that we're seeing warfare change right now. We lack that significantly. And again, we stand up these innovation units and everything else, but they are still such a small component of the big apparatus that making a dent is very difficult.
Just make two quick comments. First, I don't want to be misunderstood. Drones are going to have an impact in war going forward, just like the anti-tank weapons did in the 1930s, or I'm sorry, 1970s, about 1973. What happened is it wasn't it was a guy by the name of Philip Carver wrote an article, Tactical Revolution in Military Affairs. It was no revolution in military affairs. Is it an effective tool on the battlefield? Absolutely. And drones will be too, but it is not going to eliminate classical systems, okay? It's going to be an add-on that you're going to have to be able to use and also defend against. And my second point is, in terms of the Russian lessons learned, look, this was not the war that the Russian General Staff planned for, because they said this is a bad idea, don't do it. But the soldiers we're seeing, the Russian soldiers we're seeing, were not a surprise to the operations director of the General Staff. That's exactly why they planned operational scale warfare the way they did, because they expect the peasant army, all right? And so that's what they've got. What we're seeing now, or what at least maybe we're going to see with these 100 to 200 new battalions that are essentially drain rangers, if they actually are the young kids that come out of the schools and the universities that understand the use of this technology, then that's going to make them a better army. And that's what they're trying to do. I don't know if they can get those people into the army, because most of those kids left the country, all right, because they didn't want to fight this way. But again, it would make more effective infantry. It will not be a revolution in military affairs.
It's 5. Do you want to take one more?
Yeah. Oh, I had answers to that.
Thomas Lang from Rebuilding Ukraine. So I have a question for anybody in the panel to answer. We see that the statement was made that the European Union is going to be the ones that lead the reconstruction effort in infrastructure, and the potential of the U.S. being involved in the defense industry. Who do you foresee leading the Fortress Ukraine construction efforts to build the defense systems in place and maintenance facilities to be able to service the defense industry? Is that to be the European Union? Is that to be NATO? Or will America take a lead in Fortress Ukraine?
Well, my guess is it won't be NATO. It'll be EU, and it won't be America in the current environment. unless it's done on the private side. That's just my thought of it. But anybody else want to comment?
Yeah, it's going to be Ukraine.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, can I just,
One last one? Okay.
Last
My
question.
question is in Ukraine, as far as the defense industry, regarding battlefield repair recovery or recovery repair of tactical vehicles and equipment. Who is doing that? Is that being done by right now by Ukrainian military industrial complex, or is that being done by countries outside of Ukraine where the equipment is being evacuated out and repaired and then returned to Ukraine? If somebody can answer that.
It depends what it is. So yeah, a lot of it isn't getting repaired. You know, this is why we make, you know, cheap drones. If it's a very expensive piece of equipment, if it was manufactured by, you know, F-16s, those are being, you know, repaired by the Lockheed team. If it's a Caesar, you know, cannon, that's if, first of all, the first line of maintenance and repair are the brigades. And this is something that does not happen in the US in the same way. Okay? And it's not even legal sometimes for a soldier to work on a piece of equipment. In Ukraine, war, you know, has precluded all that. So the first people who they have some of these Army Corps, the 3rd and Azov, they have their own machine shops. Like they, you know, they do all this themselves. And one of the things that keeps some vendors out of Ukraine is that lack of a field support repair thing. And there's a company that we work with in Ukraine called Praktika. They make armored vehicles that we're trying to get more involved in doing that on a contract basis for European manufacturers. But it's a mess. I mean, it's literally a mess.
Okay, I want to thank the panelists very much. It was a nice Q&A, but I think we have to draw the line right there. I've apologized. A young lady asked a question over there. If she could come ask me again what it was, I can't quite remember it. And then I think you wanted to talk a little bit about wargaming. We didn't have time. If you want to chat about that, we can. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Pleasure to meet you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
to point out, Russia is revolution. And so then what are we dealing with? Presentation.